When you know your default style, what's comfortable for you, what's natural for you, you can begin to learn those other styles and use them when you need them, because the most effective leader is that situational leader that can tap into the right leadership style for the moment.
Welcome to another episode of the UpFlip podcast. We're here today with the branding brain behind the Dr. Phil Show, Libby Gill. I'm Alex Freeman, and we're going to pick her brain to find out how she helped executives develop the leadership skills to enhance brand images. Her clients include Acura, Capital One, Intel, Marriott, Microsoft, just to name a few. Libby's also the author of 6 books, and she has done it all, from head of communication at Sony and Universal to consulting with the Department of Defense's accounting services. Libby is here to help you level up your leadership skills, branding, and planning. Get ready to learn how to master leadership challenges to empower your employees to drive success. Libby, thank you so much for taking some time to join us today.
My pleasure, Alex. You made me sound pretty darn good. I hope I live up to it.
Yeah, it's an impressive resume. But before we jump into the questions, can you give us a little bit, we rambled off a bunch of stuff there in the introduction, but a little insight into your history with business leadership and how you came to your expertise on the topic?
Sure. I will totally date myself, but I started working as an assistant in the PR department of a company that was founded by a really legendary television writer-producer, a guy named Norman Lear, who was responsible for All in the Family and all of these considered very forward-thinking TV shows at the time. And it was his last company. And I thought, wow, what a privilege to join this kind of elite small television production distribution company. And very quickly, that company was absorbed by Columbia Pictures and then by Coca-Cola and then by Sony. And
wow.
I was not even a leader. I was a young professional at that point. And I just figured, I kind of had 2 choices. I was either going to dive under my desk and hope I survived, or raise my hand and figure it out. And I just decided I'd just keep volunteering, raising my hand, learning more. And in 5 years, I became the vice president of publicity, advertising, and promotion for Sony's worldwide television group. And then from there, went on to Turner Broadcasting and then to Universal. Heading corporate communications, always on the television side of the business, which was where the fun was. High pace, fast, all things happening. And finally, I decided I wanted to do what I loved the most, which was develop people's careers, help them become leaders, and structure teams, and really just kind of show people the way to success. So I've been doing this part of my business, the entrepreneurial part and the executive coaching, now longer than I was in the corporate world. So I've kind of flipped the formula for myself, and I never looked back.
Wow. Can you kind of summarize for us what a great leader does for an organization and what the leader's role is in a business?
Good question. Well, it's different in every organization, but basically a great leader, and there are all kinds of leaders. I wrote a book with Rice University about their leadership program for young adults, for students. And they often come with the misconception of leaders are these extroverts or cutthroats, or they're, out in front. And that's not really the case. A leader is however you define success and leadership. But essentially, you're the one that ties people and processes to business outcomes. So you are the one who is responsible at whatever level, because leadership it's not a job title. It's not a corner office. It's not even your authority level. It is your decision. You can choose at any point of your career to step up and take charge of whatever is within your purview. So even as a junior executive, or even on your first job, you can be a leader in that role by going beyond the job description, by really doing more than is required. That's what leadership is about.
And are there any specific traits or actions that either define a leader or are integral to exceptional leadership, and are those things that somebody can train and learn? Or are things people are born with?
Some people are more naturally extroverted or maybe visionary, but anyone can learn and train to be a leader. That is a taught skill. It's a learned skill. It's not something you're born with. You can learn to be strategic, to be thoughtful, to be empathetic, to learn that. And every company, a small business, solo entrepreneurs, you have your own code of ethics, you have your own values, you have your own idea of success. And the leader's goal with the competencies and values of their organization is to get people to the finish line and beyond. It's to not to settle for what you've done in the past or even what you're doing today. It's to look into the future, because it's all changing around us so quickly. It's the leader's job to kind of see around corners and determine what's next and how to get people there.
I really love all of that. And you mentioned when describing your own career trajectory, you ended up in leadership roles fairly early in that career. So how do younger leaders build credibility and trust as they either step into that first leadership role or maybe a new leadership role?
There are two things that I think are critical for building that sort of influence. And they are credibility, as you said, and also visibility. And young leaders have to be, first, they've got to know what their skills and strengths are. They've got to know what is not within their skill base. And if it's something they need to learn, they've got to go out and train for that skill. The old Southwest Airlines adage was hire for attitude, train for skill. And that's a lot of what you get as a young professional. You are hired because you've got that can-do attitude, you're ready to learn. And it's the skills that you acquire as you grow that are specific to whatever your job is. For me, that was skills in terms of language, creativity, writing was critically important, dealing with, I dealt with the press and the media. I was a spokesperson at these studios. So what I said was in, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times the next day, usually not attributed to me, but attributed to one of my executives. But I had to really learn those skills over time. You may have finance skills, you may have technical skills, you may have manufacturing skills, whatever your hard skills are, those are what get you to advance. And beyond that, it's the people skills. It's what's considered soft skills that are not at all soft, but they are communication, guidance, the ability to coach people to success, influence building. It's all of those skills that you have to build as a leader that gain you a followership. Because, I used to say, if you're out there leading and nobody's following, you're just taking a walk. So it's really about having people who want to follow along because they trust you. But young leaders need to think about that credibility and visibility. And I've got a great story for you, Alex, about a leader that I coached who was, she had the credibility as a young professional. She had her MBA, couple years in business, certainly wasn't 20 years into her career, but for that stage of her career, she had solid chops for the job she was in, which happened to be one of the big consulting firms. And so she came to me because she said, this was a hard charging young woman. She said, I want to make my mark and I want to get on the team I want to be on, because right now I'm not on the team that I want to stay with. How do I do that? And I said, well, think about what's going to get you in front of the most people you can get out and meet it, because she was new to the company. She'd been there about 3 months. So I said, how are you going to get in front of people? How are you going to let them know what you're great at, what you do, what you want to do next? How do you just go out and meet the people, let them experience you? And she said, well, what's funny is we're working in a kind of a work hard, play hard, young, dynamic kind of environment. And I'm just a diehard college basketball fan. So what I would like to do is set up the March Madness brackets. Now, I follow pro ball a little bit, basketball, and not so much college. So she had to kind of walk me through what those brackets were and how you set that up. But she decided she would do that. And for that March Madness playoffs, the college ball, she went out to meet her colleagues. And she got to know all people that she didn't know at all, to introduce herself. This was in the pre-COVID when you were still in an office. But people got to know her really quickly. They saw that what she was great at. She explained her background. And within just a couple of months, she was on the strategy team that she had her eye on. And within a year, promotion to a higher level. And she's had a promotion. I think she was like I was almost every year for the past 5 years since I've known her. So that was about letting people know your skills and strengths, what your credibility and your expertise is, and then not being shy about sharing your personality, what you lead with, who you are. And even introverts, I always say I'm a situational extrovert. People assume I'm extroverted because I get up and talk and do keynotes with a lot of people, but I can pull it out when I need to. And then I'm back in my little corner in my office, doing what I do. So those are important for young leaders, young professionals to learn that leadership is a choice and they got to get out there and let people know who they are.
To follow up on that, we are now entering this post-COVID environment where companies that were maybe entrepreneurs that got out there and founded something during the pandemic, or started a side hustle and now they're about to bring in employees for the first time, that maybe it's going to be a distributed workforce that is all digital, no office. That visibility portion, how do you continue that in an all digital world where we're not going to have those moments where we bump in the hallway?
It is definitely more of a challenge. You're absolutely right about that. But I think we have to be very intentional about it. You're not going to have that hallway quick meeting or a cup of coffee with a colleague. So you have to put those meetings on your calendar and you've got to think about it. I have my senior execs who are just busy people write out a list. Who do you need to be in front of? Who do you need to get to know? How much time should you be devoting to that? Write that up, hand it to your admin to set up those 20 meetings out 3 months or 4 months. Just get them on the calendar. And for young professionals, request that 15-minute Zoom time. Don't turn your camera off in meetings. That's a huge mistake. Be there, be a presence, ask a question. And if you're one of those introverted professionals, and I deal with a lot of introverted leaders. You can be an introvert and a very effective leader. But if you know the anxiety is going to be ramping up when you're on that, that Hollywood Square Zoom box with another 20 people, be prepared to speak up in the first 10 minutes or so. Have a question, have a comment. Don't wait until an hour has gone by when either somebody has stolen your thunder and said exactly what you were going to say, or your anxiety has gone through the roof and you no longer feel comfortable raising your hand. So be prepared. Do a little bit more due diligence than you might if you were just having a casual meeting in somebody's office. And reach out to people that you want to get to know. Let them know you want their feedback. Let them know that, don't wait for that 6-month or annual appraisal. Ask for it, not in a needy approval-seeking way, but, hey, how could I do that better? Hey, how did that call go? What did you think? What would you like to see from me in the next couple of months? Don't be shy about those things. Your career is on the line and you need to be visible even when you're like this, like we are.
So I think that one of the things that you've definitely laid out here is that intentionality is an important value to live by as a business leader. What are some of the other ones, and how do leaders determine what their core values are?
Well, first of all, you've got to know what success looks like. And if you don't, if you're a senior leader, typically we know what that means. We know the vision and the mission of the organization or the team, the company. Mm-hmm. We get that. That's why we're up here doing that. If you're not at that spot yet, it's still something you should know. You should be asking questions about where are we going. And great leaders, you got to share that focus of the future. You got to get people excited about it. I think a big mistake is when people, if you ask people within the organization, what is our mantra for success? What does success look like to our team? And they can't answer that question. There is somewhere, something has not trickled down. So that's incumbent on you as a leader to know. But younger leaders, those of you who are just climbing up the ladder, it's okay to ask those questions. Even if you feel like, gee, maybe I should know that, set up a 15-minute call with someone. Don't forget phone still works. If you're zoomed out, you just can't do another virtual meeting, ask to set up a phone call. But it's really understanding what success looks like. And then it's the steps of how do you get there? And to me, it's 3 simple things. It's first, you clarify the vision. What does it look like to you? What does it look like to your team? If you're at the top end of the career spectrum, what does that look like to the organization? Then simplify the path to get there. What does it mean? What are the action steps? What are the milestones along the way? How do you measure them? So you first clarify the vision. Where are we all going together? Simplify the pathway, which also means for leaders, you got to open those doors. You got to get time wasters out of the way. I think of it as getting the wrong things out of the way, bad habits, waste of time, any of those things, and bringing the right things in, whether that's an outside coach like me, or a training program, or some resources that your team needs. Leaders, you cannot overestimate. You can't ignore the obvious. You've got to ask questions and see what people need from you. And then finally, you got to execute that plan. You've got to execute it with integrity, with aggression. You've got to jump on that plan and move forward. And it's measurement along the way to say, and it's always the leader's job to say, hey, what do you need from me? How can I help you get there faster? What are you lacking? What's missing? What can I do for you? Who do you need to know? That's to me the language of leadership, where you are asking those questions. And finally, you got to celebrate the small wins, and don't wait for your year end, your fiscal year close, or a big sale comes through. Celebrate the wins. Lord knows we need to be celebrating today. And if that's, yes, the dance party on Zoom has gotten a little cornball, and I think those have all gone far away, but reach out to someone and just to thank them. Send out an email citing somebody's great work and copying the right people. Make sure you say please and thank you. It's all of those things that the leader's job, those little things. I know people that have left jobs just because they felt ignored. They didn't feel like their ideas were taken seriously. And by the way, if you're a leader who feels like you've heard it all, well, listen one more time. And if it's not going to happen because you already know the answer, you still owe it to that young professional to hear them out, or to at least jump in respectfully and explain what you've done in the past, and then challenge that person. Well, maybe you can come up with a new spin on that. Here's what we tried before that didn't work, but maybe we missed something. Maybe we overlooked something. And to me, the kiss of death is the leaders or companies that say, we've always done it this way, or we've never done it that way. Everything's a new game every day. And the best leaders are the risk takers. They're the people that get others excited about trying new things, about setting the bar higher, and then helping them get there. I always say it's creating a lift as you climb culture, where you kind of take somebody on each arm and you take them with you. Those are the best companies to work for. Who doesn't want to work where a leader is listening to them, respecting their ideas, teaching and training them, and just giving them that sort of, showing them the kind of humility that leaders and followers deserve.
In terms of process and approach in style, a really two-part question here. One, how does somebody go about finding that leadership style that is going to match who they are as a person and the organization? And are there defined leadership styles that can be successful universally in different organizations?
Well, Alex, if you want it, I'll give you a link to my Libby Gill leadership style assessment. There are lots of different models. Daniel Goleman, who was the guy that really furthered the whole idea of emotional intelligence, he has 6 styles that he cites. I keep things simple. I look at 4 styles. And most people, as much as we're reluctant to fit in a box, we also kind of want to know, where do we fall in this range? And I see leaders who are inspirational. They're the ones who are out there in front, painting that vivid picture that's like, wow, I want to be there. Those are people like Steve Jobs. Anybody, and we all probably know somebody that's got that big picture idea. Now, they're not always the people that are going to follow through. They're not always the ones that are going to do the details. They may need a partner to do that. So there's also the supportive leader. That's the leader that says, people first. People first. I'm here to support you. I want you to go out there and win. That's a supportive leader. They are really great at exactly that, helping people thrive. They're good at mending rifts. They're good at building trust. They may not feel comfortable being front and center like that visionary leader, the inspirational leader, but they're the ones that people go to when they've got a problem or an issue. That's that supportive leader. There's a delegative leader, the one that says, hey, you are the one that knows better than I. You are a subject matter expert. I never pretend that I know anything about people's financial models, their supply chains, not my strength. I'm all about language, branding, nuances, soft skills, communication. But that delegative leader says, hey, you know your stuff. I'm going to just hand this over to you. That works really well when your people are high level, when they're sophisticated, when they are truly subject matter experts. Doesn't work so well if you hand a big responsibility over someone who's new in their career, new in your business, younger. They need more guardrails and guidance than that. And then finally, there's the directive leader, which can sound harsh. I get lots of people saying, well, he or she is too direct. Can you soften the rough elbows a little bit? Personally, I like direct leaders. I want somebody who just says it, does it. You know where they stand. There's no guessing. But there are times that can be harsh, that can feel like too much truth telling at once, particularly for younger professionals. But in times like COVID, in times when you've got it, you can't wait for consensus. You can't talk it through with the entire team. You got to make a decision. Here's what we're doing and why. Now go. That's an important skill to have. So if people understand their default style, what kind of leader are you? I typically fall on that inspirational. I think big picture. I'm not so great with the details. My team will attest to that. That's why I've got them. They pick up that slack for me. But I'm pretty good at creating an idea person, all of that kind of stuff. But when you know your default style, what's comfortable for you, what's natural for you, you can begin to learn those other styles and use them when you need them, because the most effective leader is that situational leader that can tap into the right leadership style for the moment. If you got to make a quick decision and you're not really the directive guy, but it's like, we got to do this or else, here's what we're doing, then you've got to be able to tap into that. If you need to be supportive because you've got somebody, particularly now, that's struggling, that's having mental health issues, that's got COVID, that's got a family member at home, all of those things, you got to tap into that support, that empathy. When we are looking into people's kitchens and offices and Zoom schools, you better find that empathy in you and tap into that. So when you can run through and really toggle among those styles, then your leadership bandwidth is so much broader. You've got the ability to be the kind of leader that your followers need when they need it. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And, every leader should be developing every possible strength that they could have. And so that kind of leads me into this question of, to do that, you have to know your strengths and weaknesses. What are some ways to self-evaluate, to understand those strengths and weaknesses? And how often should you be doing that to re-identify your strengths and weaknesses?
Well, some of us are pretty reflective and self-aware and think about these things on a regular basis. Others, not so much. And there's no good or bad there. There's just what is. I think it starts with your own self-evaluation. It's funny you should ask this, because in the corporate world, I go out and say I'm dealing with a senior leader in a big healthcare organization or a tech organization. I have them go through an assessment looking at kind of the big buckets of leadership, like influence and relationship building, communication, team development, all of those things, and look at what their strengths are, what their skills are. And then look at where the areas of growth or opportunity, we don't say weaknesses anymore, or flaws. It's all areas of opportunity. So, and looking at, where do I need to grow? And this is not necessarily hard skills or technical skills. Nobody's going to turn me into a financial whiz. I knew that day one in the corporate world. And the first people I befriended as a corporate leader were the IT folks and the accounting folks. Because I knew if I was going to run into problems, that's where they were going to be. And I wanted those folks on my side. I knew what my strengths were and I knew what they weren't. So I have somebody go through an assessment like that. And you could just ask yourself these questions. What am I good at? What am I not good at? But my leaders that I coach, I have them rank themselves in terms of effectiveness on a 1 to 10 scale. And then I go out and I do a 360 assessment where we're looking at colleagues truly in a 360, people above, people that are peers, direct reports, people that give a whole perspective. And I have them anonymously. I don't like a check the box. I don't think that gives you enough color or context. I ask them the same questions I've asked the leader that I'm coaching, and I give them all that feedback anonymously, and nobody else sees it. But here's how you can do that for yourself. You can ask yourself some of those things that you think, gee, am I good at this? And it can also be skills-based. Am I good at these things? And ask yourself, what do I need to grow? What am I good at? What am I not so good at? And make your own list of what you want to know about. Go to 5 of your colleagues. Tell them that you want to ask them anonymously. You can get a coach like me to do this, or you can do it yourself. But in fact, I've got a blog on see yourself as others see you on my website with this exercise. And go to them and ask them, what do you see? What are 3 adjectives that you would use to describe my strengths? What are 3 things you would cite as areas that I need to grow in? Or you can ask them those specific questions. People feel more comfortable when it's anonymous, although maybe they'll say, hey, I'll just share this with you. So I tend to say, have somebody send it to another party and have them compile it for you. People are pretty candid when they know, look, don't be nice. I mean, I don't want you to be mean, but I want you to be candid. I want you to give me real feedback. And if you do that on the job and say, I want your real feedback, and I'd love to know what areas you think are important, boss or supervisor, and I'd like your candid feedback about those areas because I'm really trying to grow and stretch. So few people do that. And so few people feel comfortable giving that kind of feedback. When you make it easy for them and you tell them, I really want this, they know that you mean it. And you'll get some. I did this with a client of mine who went out and asked people that she wanted to know what they thought. And she compiled her own list of questions. She didn't ask 5 people. She asked 30 people. And she put it all on a spreadsheet so she could track. She was a good tech person. She could track for common themes. And no surprise, one of the big things was she was detail-oriented. She closed the loop. She was communicative. And she found like 3 or 4 themes that were cited by just about everybody. And she found some areas that people cited she could grow in as well. So it's pretty revealing. It's not for the faint of heart. So if you feel I can't handle the truth, as Jack Nicholson said, but I think it's a good exercise.
In that area, if somebody can't handle that kind of feedback, is that something that they should work on to become a more effective leader? And how do they work on that?
Yeah, you just have to develop a thick skin. When I started out coaching, I would tell people, now, how direct do you want me to be on a scale of 1 to 10? I tend to measure everything because that's not my natural point of view. So because because I'm much more of a creative person, I measure everything. So I would say, Alex, how direct do you want me to be on a scale of 1 to 10? And if somebody said, like a 6, I knew I had to help them build their confidence. If they said a 12, I was fine. But part of the leader's job is to help people build their confidence as young leaders, as young professionals. You don't have to baby people. You don't have to coddle them. But you have to realize that, people, especially when they're newer in their area, they're still tenderhearted. They're still, they're like, little new growths that need a little watering and nurturing before they can withstand a freeze. So keep that in mind. And there's some great studies about people who are more, have been in their job longer. They're more confident in their skills. They want very direct feedback. Tell me what I need to do and what I don't. People who are younger in their career, they need a little confidence building along with their coaching.
So I want to kind of shift over into that kind of someone who's stepping into a new leadership role type of person. And the first person I want to ask about is someone who is stepping into a new organization in a leadership role, that they were the outside hire coming in. Mm-hmm. What are some of the first steps that they should take to prepare themselves and set themselves up for success?
I think the first thing you need to do is define at whatever level you're at in your career arc, what kind of leader am I? Have that conversation with yourself or talk to a couple of trusted friends, colleagues, former team members that know you. How do you see it's again, that 360, what kind of leader am I? And I'll sometimes have senior leaders that are, they're looking for jobs or they're in that in-between consulting stage. Write a few articles for LinkedIn. Define your leadership style for yourself. So it forces you to create that framework. Then as you go in with that new supervisor or leadership team, you've got to know, what does success look like for me in 3 months? If I hit it out of the park for you, What does that mean? And thus, it's, well, you got to restructure your team. This area is a mess, and that's why we brought you in. We need you to fix a broken area, or we need you to go out and capture new business, or you've got to know, and you may know some of this having gone through the interviewing process, but if you're younger and you got hired based on some hard skills, and you may not know the subtleties of all of it, sit down with your boss and say, I'd really like to know what success looks like. What is my success in supporting you to be successful? And what do you need from me in the first 3 to 6 months to be successful? And then you create a roadmap. Know what this looks like. If you're hired as the new social media manager, what does that look like? What does success look like? Is it the number of likes, impressions? You've advanced the copy. You're more on brand. You've brought the company up to a new level. You got to get into the specifics. You may not get the specifics in day one, but those are the kinds of questions you begin to ask. So you get, oh, this is what they want from me. I'm getting that. And it may take you a month or two. It takes 3 to 6 months to learn a new job. And you've got to cut yourself some slack. I had a new leader go into a very sophisticated financial position. And she thought, she not only did she have to rebuild a whole structure and division, build a team there because it was a newer area. She felt like not only does she have to do that to shore up this area, but she had to know everything about the business products. And there are all these financial products. It was like, you're not going to learn this overnight. If you get it in 3 months, that's amazing. If you get it in 6 months, you are on track. So you've got to keep your leaders, your management team informed also. This is what I'm working on. This is what I'm doing. Let them know your successes, not I've had people say, well, isn't that bragging? Isn't that me being arrogant? People are generally, in my experience, humble. If you are humble to a fault, that's not good. You want to let people know, clue them in on your successes, credit others when appropriate. Don't always credit someone else. Sometimes you've got to say, yeah, I did that. I'm really proud of this accomplishment and I want to share it with you. And here's what the team did, or here's what I want to give a shout out to my colleague and peer who really helped me, make that happen. So those are the things young leaders need to do. And again, they're so obvious. It's like common knowledge, but not common practice. Go in there with a plan, act on it, share it, let people know what you did.
Then the other leader is someone who got promoted from within. What does that person need to do that, one, I guess, navigating relationships with former coworkers who are probably now direct reports? What are those first steps to become successful in the new position?
That happened to me. And when I was saying that 5-year uphill ride, and it was partly fortuitous. I was kind of in the right place at the right time, but I was also ready for the challenge. I stepped above a number of colleagues. And there was one I remember who was not happy. He was my buddy. We went out to lunch all the time. And now suddenly I was giving, not orders, but giving directives, setting the bar. It took a little positioning. And what you really need to do is customize your communication. You don't talk to everybody the same way. You have some people you need to be a little softer in your leadership style. Others you can be more direct with. And you really have to figure out, why did you get bumped up? What is it that they saw in you that your leadership team needs from you? And again, ask those same questions. In my new role, what are you seeing? What would success look like in 3 months and 6 months? What can I do to make the team grow faster, to be more effective in this role? But you do have to be a little bit more nuanced in your communication, because often people do get bumped up over other people who are in the running for the same job. And it can be very awkward. And, it can make some people very unhappy with you initially. You've got to show them that you've got their back, that you recognize their abilities, that possibly that they might have gotten that job. You got to figure out what's the right tone to set with that person and just continue to be supportive and there to help their success. And eventually, I've seen most people come around. And if they can't for some reason, those are the people that usually leave. They're not happy with you as the boss. They will select out. And if they're really the wrong fit in that new leadership, structure, sometimes they have to be managed out. And those are the hard choices leaders have to make.
This is going to bring us to a section of our show that we call our Blitz section. These Blitz questions come from our YouTube channel. So I just want to remind all of our listeners out there, go check out UpFlip on YouTube. Leave a question in the comments there or on the podcast, wherever you're getting it. And we'll ask it to a guest on a future show. So for these questions, Libby, we're going to go real short, 20 seconds on each. The clock, I won't have a hard buzzer on you, but right in there, 20 seconds.
The speed round.
It's the speed round for a couple questions, and then we'll get to some longer form answers for the second half of the show here. All right, first question. Ryder DeLorme is asking, where do you see network TV going?
Network TV has got to run for its money with the streaming services. Streaming has taken over. They've proven themselves. We've all been on the couch for 2 years, and they are winning the battle. So network TV has to pull out all the stops and do some really innovative things to win back viewers. But we are so fractionalized, don't see it ever happening.
Ryder also followed up with a question of how did you figure out your audience when you were working in television?
You mean literally the television audience?
Yeah.
You had to really get a good sense of who that show was going to appeal to. And you really studied it. We also got the research daily. So you saw who was tuning in, how old, the demographics, we lived by those. How old were they? You also saw where people tuned out in 15-minute increments. Do they tune out at the first 15 minutes or do they stay for half the show or the whole thing? So we read our research.
Leonardo Uscock is asking, what was the most important risk you took and why?
In my whole career?
Yeah.
Leaving the corporate world. I had no clue what I was doing. People said, well, you should start a PR firm, which I had no desire doing. I'd done that for 16, 17 years. I didn't want to do it anymore. I also saw it changing with the whole blogosphere and the online digital world. The game had changed. And I just didn't want to play the digital game where there were just too many outlets everywhere. It's just harder to win that one. And so I left and I thought I knew what I was doing. I don't think I'd ever taken a business class in my life. I learned very quickly on the job. And that was a big risk. I was sole support of my family, had 2 kids, was getting divorced, and I was all in.
Leonardo also wanted to know, if you had to go back in time, you've got no connections, $5,000, but you have today's knowledge. Would you start all over again in the same industry? What path would you take and how would you market yourself?
That's kind of how I did start, with no knowledge and about $5,000. I would absolutely do it again. I love the career that I've created, that I've been fortunate to have. I love my clients. I would hire a coach. I'd find somebody who was a role model who could speed up my growth curve. Because most of my clients are so smart. I say, you'll figure this out, but I can help you do it faster. It won't be as lonely, and you'll have someone you can have as a sounding board or to ask the dumb questions that are never dumb, but you can ask those questions too. That's what I would have done with my $5,000, or maybe half of it. The other half, I would have done a snappy website.
Ooh, yeah, that's really great advice. That's the end of the Blitz questions. That was nice and painless. Well done. To kind of shift the conversation back a little bit, looking at future planning as a leader, if you're planning the business's future, how should you identify opportunities and risks for a business? And what tools or strategies are available to a leader to do that?
Well, here's how I do it. Obviously, if you're working with a company of 30,000 people and you've got a 10-year or 5-year plan, you've got all of that. If you're an entrepreneur, you've got a small business, I plan about 18 months in advance, and I create my 1-year plan. I break it into 90-day plans. I set my big objectives, both professional and personal and revenue, and I start with those goals in mind. And then I slot the action items into Q1 through Q4, and I divide those into months. And then I regularly look back at the big picture objectives to say, wait a minute, are the things I did in February, the things I'm doing right now, do those match my big picture goals or not? And if they're not, I got to ask myself, why am I off track? Was this a conscious, intentional decision, or did I just, follow the shiny item there? And often what happens is not only do I hit those goals, and I always have one big one. It's either a new course or a new book or something that's going to take me a year, but everything else that's layered under there. Sometimes I'll put things on those big picture objectives without actually knowing what I'm going to do or how I'm going to get there, and they show up. I'm going to create 2 passive income streams. Lo and behold, They land in my lap because it's the whatever you believe. I do believe I've sent it out to the universe. And, I've got the connections and I recognize it when it comes along. So having those big picture goals and then those regular action steps, that's what works for me. In fact, I have 2 groups where I guide people through those processes. That was on my goal list years ago. I want a membership group, and that came out of COVID. And you're talking about side hustles. I created a coaching group and people just showed up totally free that I thought would last about a month or 2 as people kind of talked through their initial COVID shock. We stayed together for a year where people pivoted, they brought their businesses online, and it was this amazing group. They were from Australia and Canada and Trinidad and across the US. And out of that, I started 2 membership groups, one for people who need to write, but need the accountability and the feedback from an expert. And the other was for entrepreneurs that need support, accountability, and resources. And again, you'll figure it out on your own, but we can help you get there faster.
And as you kind of look at those opportunities that present themselves, there's obviously always risk in opportunity, whether it's an opportunity cost or actual financial risk in that regard. How does somebody assess risks that are smart and risks to avoid?
Well, first, you've got to know what your own risk tolerance is. When I have people that come to me who are starting businesses or like I did, leaving the corporate world where they were successful to try something new and often something completely different. And I say, I'll take you through this process. I can't guarantee success, and I won't. It's in my contract. I can't make this happen for you. And if it crashes and burns, would you still be happy that you did it? If their answer is no, then they probably don't want to work with me and they probably don't want to take that risk. If their answer is yes, I got to try it, I'm on board. So you've got to determine, how much can I spend on this? And with some people, it's $10,000. With some people, it's $100,000 or more. You've got to decide what's the financial risk that I'm willing to take? What's the bet I'm taking on myself? And it's 3 things I ask them. What are your strengths and skills? What are your passions and interests? And what does the marketplace want from you? Because if you've got a passion and a strength, but the marketplace doesn't want it from you, maybe that's not the right bet. Maybe you try something else. And, it's that proof of concept. How long are you going to try something? And I've had entrepreneurs. I had somebody who started a kind of an alternative health company, and it just didn't work. Her business model was flawed. Her idea was flawed. It didn't go anywhere. She came to me after 7 years, no revenue. I said, look, I know what I would do. It's up to you how long you stay with it. She said, well, I'm going to give it another try. Came back to me a year later and said, help me dissolve this. And what do I say to people? And it was really sad. But, she was betting on something that she wasn't willing to measure.
Following up on that, what does a leader do if they take a risk and it doesn't pan out? How do they recover from that mistake?
There's only one thing you can do. If you made a calculated risk, you thought about it, you planned for it, you decided it made sense to do it, you invested the right people, time, energy, money, and it didn't work, you learned from it. That's the only thing you can do is learn from it. When it comes to success, I said, my bar is very low. If I do something and it doesn't work, if I learn nothing, that's a failure. If I learn something, that's a success. And typically, if I don't learn anything and I try it again, I get knocked upside the head and I've learned it the 2nd or 3rd time around. So eventually that's a success. I may abandon whatever that project was. And I do frequently. I've tried all kinds of things that haven't worked. Just like I'm sure you have, right, Alex?
Oh, yeah. Many, many, many times.
Yeah. But if you get locked into something just because you think that's the way it has to be done, don't be an entrepreneur. That's not the way it works.
Especially, we think about entrepreneurs as just being risk takers by definition, and that small business ethos of being able to pivot quickly sometimes means you head down the wrong path, but sometimes it also means you're heading down the right path. And when you do make that pivot, that decision to pivot as a leader, how do you communicate that to your team to inspire them towards that shared vision and common purpose?
A lot of people believe, and I include myself in this, that leadership is about communication. It is about being as transparent as you can be, sharing information up and down the pipeline. That's how we make decisions. That's how we know we're trusted. That's how we know we're valued. You share the narrative, create something exciting. This is where we're going next. I have a system that I share with a lot of people. It's 5 steps for change. And I won't go into it all now, but it's really knowing. And part of that is sharing the vision. You got to tell them what you see until other people see it. And especially they see the what's in it for me. Oh, I see what you're talking about. It's way bigger than I could ever do. I couldn't go where you're going, but I see where I fit into that. I see where my skill applies, or as we love to say, aligns. I see where I align with that vision. And when people see that, they think, oh yeah, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to see this through. And in all the studies about, what people want from their job or their career on a 10 items, money's usually around, 4 or 5 in there, 6. And not that money's not important. I love making money, but it's other things like having a purpose, having a vision, being part of a team, feeling challenged, feeling valued. Those are even more important than the money for most people.
Yeah, and I guess that's a great question as well, because how does a leader identify what is going to motivate their team? For some members of the team, it might be, a pay raise, but for a lot of them, as you just mentioned, it probably isn't that. It's something else.
It's so simple. You ask them, you listen, you act on what you learn. And it's so easy. I have a leader right now who's negotiating with someone to stay with the company. A lot of people are getting poached and picked off because there are a lot of opportunities out there right now in the business world. And you got to know what your people value. Is it flexible time? Is it a shorter commute? Is it, you can't always fix that for someone if they're living here and you're there. But, there are things that you can give. There are things people care about. And find out what those are. And whether they're negotiating or not, just find out what people care about and value them as human beings as much as you do as workers. Well, actually more.
Yeah. And then obviously, you've made so many allusions and comments about the team around a leader and how important that team is. How should a leader assess their current team to find any gaps or problem areas? And do they need to do a regular assessment of that, or is that something that becomes obvious as time goes on?
I think it depends on the structure, the size of the organization. If your team is 5 people and you all know each other really well and you know your moves and you know your strengths and weaknesses and you're open, then you can have those conversations on a regular basis. Here, let me handle that. I'll do that. You do this. If your team is, I've got somebody who's got 400 people on his team. That's a big team and they're international. Hard to know. You've got to trickle that down to your managers and other leaders. They've got to know how to assess the team, whether you use online surveys, whether you have conversations with people. I mean, just about everybody does their 6-month or annual appraisals. Take those seriously. I had a leader who had not had an appraisal in 7 years. I said, why did you not go in there and demand it? You deserve to know what other people are thinking. You deserve to know what's getting you promoted or what's not. So you've got to really pay attention. And we can't know 400 people intimately, but you got to know your main team. And when I say that, I have an assessment I send out that asks if you know the people on your leadership team. Do you know their kids' names? Do you know where they go on vacation? Do you know what their hobbies are? You don't need to know that for 200 people, but do you know it for your top 6? If you don't know it, what's missing there? Are you not having real conversations? Start a meeting with, hey, we're going to go around. I want to start with a personal tidbit. Here's mine. I did this over the weekend. At first, people might look at you like, oh, what seminar did you take? What book did you read? But after a while, they'll start to loosen up and talk to each other.
I want to kind of shift into the area of potential hard conversations that leaders are going to have. Some of those being there's maybe a toxic member on the team. There's an under-contributing member on the current team. How do you move to fix those problems without impacting the rest of the team and the team dynamic?
Yeah, that's really important for a leader. You're the one who has to have the difficult conversations. And you got to toughen up. And what I see more often is people will ignore those conversations because they're awkward, they're uncomfortable. It's someone you care about, you value, and maybe even as a friend, but you're not going to have that conversation with because, that's not fun. But you are letting the entire team down if you let someone underperform. And I will see often in larger organizations where you can kind of shift projects around and you can work around somebody because there's somebody else to pick up the slack. I've seen big organizations that you would know allow an underperformer to stay on a team for a decade or more. And my question to the supervisor, once they've seen that, is, hey, let me ask you, this were your business, your small team, and you were writing out a check for, $60,000 or $260,000 to that person for their salary. How would you feel about that? And if they say, oh, no, I could never tolerate that. Well, what does that tell you? And I've had that conversation with many business leaders. It's like, but we love her. She's so great. Everybody loves her and she's been here so long. Yeah, but the whole team works around her because she can't make a decision. There's something wrong. Yeah, try coaching, try remedial, try feedback. And if that person doesn't work, does not contribute to the success of the team, which you have defined and you have measured, they've got to be managed out. To me, honestly, you're not doing them any favors by letting them sit there and stagnate. And it sounds hard, but sometimes kicking them out with compassion, with resources, is the best thing you can do for their careers as well as for your own team. Your team is waiting for you to take that move. Believe me, because if they're picking up the slack, they know it. And they can be very resentful that you're not doing something about this. So we've got to have those hard conversations, ideally before it comes to that breaking point.
And then what about employees that have promise you really think can advance up, but for some reason maybe lack experience in a certain area or confidence in their own abilities? How do you as the leader coach them up into becoming the employee you think they can be?
I think you just got to show them the love. You've got to give them the projects, give them the risks, give them the feedback, and give them time to develop. I mean, that is one of the essential components of leadership, is that you're developing leadership underneath you. And it may not be in your job description, but it doesn't matter. That's what you need to be doing. Some companies don't think about succession plans. How are we going to move everybody up? And which is, it's ridiculous. Do you think you're going to live forever? Well, you're not. And are you going to stay in your job forever? Don't you want somebody coming up behind you so you can go to a higher level? So you've got to identify that those are, I hate when people say high potentials, because what is everybody else? Are those your low or sort of mid-range potentials? You hire people because they're high potential. You keep them because they're high potential, and you nurture them. And if they're a little further down the food chain so that you can't give them that hands-on kind of coaching and nurturing, you make sure that their supervisor is doing that, and that you have occasional meetings. Maybe you only do it once a quarter with what, I didn't learn this until I was a coach, your skip level people, not your direct reports, but the ones down a skip or two, that you make the time. Maybe you only see them once a year. If you've got, 1,000 people on your team, call an all hands meeting, do what you need to do to get in front of those people and give them encouragement, and make sure you're training leaders at all levels to be nurturing and coaching and guiding people. You want those keepers to stay with you. You don't want them to get picked off because their LinkedIn looks great or it's a necessary skill. Boy, there are some jobs you just can't keep them. There are people that they're lining up to steal them from you. So you've got to make them know that this is a place they can learn and grow, and identify a pathway for them. If they can see that path, many of them will stay with you to move through that path and be part of the team.
Once you've kind of built that team, how do you as a leader foster that collaborative environment and facilitate productive workplace relationships? And I guess how much control does a leader actually have over that aspect of the workplace?
You become a role model. You walk the talk. You become a role model for what your values are. That is not your values, your culture, whatever you call it. It's the emotional truths as well as the hard technical facts of the business. You got to be what you say you are. It's not for a plaque that's hanging in the cafeteria or the HR hallway. It's really showing that. And during hard times, that's when leaders really show their stuff. You got to be the rock for other people. You got to be the one that checks in when you know somebody's having a difficult time, their family's having a tough time. I was trying to do a 360 with a leader who I knew wanted to be part of it, and I just couldn't get her scheduled. And I finally asked her boss, what's the issue? Why is she not participating? Why can't I hear back? She has a newborn and her husband has COVID. It's like, oh, wow. I reached out to her and said, I know you want to participate. I don't need even half an hour of your time. Give me 5 minutes and I'll ask a couple of questions. And she said, I'm in. So you got to find out, to talk to people, have those kinds of relationships, be that open, be vulnerable, let them know what you screwed up. That's a great way to get people to trust you, is to let them know. One thing, when I do keynotes, and people read my intro like you did, and she did this and this, it's like, oh, here's where I really started. I was talking Christmas tree at a mall, and then I was a tap dancing bear at Knott's Berry Farm in Southern California. And then I was a hand model for Fancy Feast cat food. That's where I really started. It took me 10 years to figure out how to get a real job. So, level the playing field a little bit. You're not so special.
That's really great and fantastic advice. And are there any, besides being vulnerable as a leader and finding out and seeking out those things, are there any processes, SOPs, tools that leaders can use to promote that positive culture within their organization?
Yeah, one thing, when things go south, as they will, especially if you're taking risks, leaders take the blame and they give the credit. So remember, if something screws up on your watch, it is your fault. No matter where the misstep happened, it's on you. Take the blame for it. Cop to it. Be responsible. Somebody knows they did something wrong along the way. And yes, if there's something illegal or immoral, you got to deal with that. But if it's just your garden variety screw up and you were all in it together, take the blame. Own it. Tell people what you learned from it and move on.
And can you talk about why it's important to recognize employees for their work, and what are some great methods for a leader to create that employee recognition program?
There's everything from the fancy awards banquet where the top sales producer gets the whatever statuette or the trip or whatever they win, and those are great. All the way down to one of the speaker bureaus I work with. When they send me a paycheck, which is really nice, they put a $5 Starbucks card in there. I don't need it. I usually give it to someone, but it's so sweet that they're not just saying, hey, here's your paycheck. You did your job. It's like, hey, here's a little something for you. And I'll tell you one example of one of the best leadership recognition I ever saw. And there are books and there are experts on this. You can find lots of people to help you, but it's really about knowing your people and how to serve them. And I was working with a group, and I've written about this, so I can talk about it. Abbott Medical, who must be going crazy right now because they're on the COVID front lines with testing and all of that. But I spoke at a sales function they had, and it was their big awards function and for their sales producers. And they were taking everybody on kind of a thank you celebration. They didn't tell them what it was. But it happened to be, they were in Chicago, and it happened to be a cruise around the harbor in a yacht. Fancy schmancy food and champagne and the whole works. Now, one thing they learned is you got to have some Dramamine on board, or at least let people know they're going to be captive for 3 hours on a boat. But what they did was, when people boarded the yacht, the heads of the 4 division heads were there dressed like waiters, holding trays of wine and champagne. And as people walked up the ramp, there were their supervisors. They're literally waiting on them. That was their way of saying, hey, we don't take servant leadership as that's not lip service. We are here to serve you, literally. And it was such a fun way of expressing who they were. They're clever. They're hard driving. They wanted to have some fun with it. And it was so funny, even though they'd rented their waiter outfits, at the end, everybody wanted to sign their jackets. So of course they had to purchase them, but it was such a fun way of saying thank you for a job well done. So a little creativity, a little imagination, say thank you in a way that fits your team.
And are there? I've got two questions left for you here. Are there any leadership tools or software programs we haven't talked about yet that you might want to recommend, and why are they beneficial?
Well, wow. You don't want to ask me about software programs because that is not my strength. There are lots of them out there. I'll tell you, a couple of books. First of all, my book, You Unstuck. Anybody that's like, whoa, we've hit a rut, we're not risk-taking, go for that. Another book called Measure What Matters, written by a superstar investor, a guy named John Doerr. And it's all about how Google and Amazon, how they succeed doing it, literally measuring what matters. And another book that I find just so influential, not a leadership book at all, but it's a book called Change or Die, written by a journalist who studied organizations where people were told, if you don't change your lifestyle habits, if you don't change the way you're approaching life or work, there's going to be a serious outcome. And when this journalist found out, only 10% of people who were told by their physician, if you don't change, you're going to die. Only 9 or 10% of people make those lifestyle changes. So he went on a search of, first of all, why are those other 90% not doing it? And what are the 10% doing? And who's leading them to make those critical changes? And to me, that was such a fascinating look into what makes people change and what doesn't. Saying do it doesn't necessarily do it, but really guiding them like whole person. That's what guides people to change. So I can offer that advice. Go to my website, libbygill.com. I've got a resources button with all kinds of freebies and downloads and articles and assessments. So anybody's welcome to that.
And finally, I just want to ask you about the importance of mentorship as a leader, both especially having a mentor if you are a leader, and how one might go about finding one and how to establish that relationship.
Well, first, look around you. Who is a role model for you already? It may be someone you work with, someone you know. It can be someone at a peer level. And you need to ask them for what you want. Make it clear. Make it time defined, not just to, hey, would you be my mentor? What does that mean? Does it mean that we can have a coffee date once a quarter? When I started my first business, I didn't really know what I was doing, but one of my bosses along the way, who I thought was not only a stand-up guy, not always easy to find in my Hollywood days, but also a great business guy, I just went to him and said, look, I'm starting this business. He thought I was nuts. I'm starting this business and it's kind of in this area. And I'm just wondering if you would mentor me, if I can ask you, once a quarter, if we could have breakfast. And he said, yes, once a quarter we can have breakfast or any time you want, and pick up the phone when you need something. And true to his word, we met for breakfast. Probably that first year, it was about once a month. He never let me pick up a check, even though I was always the one asking him. I will never forget. His name is Andy Kaplan. He worked at Sony with me. He was a great guy. Find someone like that if you are lucky enough to have someone like that around you. I will never forget. To him, it was so easy giving that advice. And there really wasn't much I could do to repay him. I wasn't at his level back then, but it was a standing offer. Like, if you need something for you, for your kids, for a friend, for a loved one, just know I'm here. If there's anything I can do, that's all he needed to know. He was just one of those great people. And, if you ask for help, you will find it.
Libby Gill, who went from being a tap dancing bear to the branding brain behind the Dr. Phil show and so much more. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you, Alex. And you are a great resource for everybody that needs leadership and guidance. So people should be popping onto your YouTube and your podcast on a regular basis.
You heard it there first, folks. Make sure you're checking out the podcast every week as it comes out. Go to the YouTube channel, UpFlip on YouTube, and also upflip.com/blog, where there's other great resources. And also go check out Libby's website as well. Libby, you want to give them the URL one more time?
It's my name, libbygill.com, LIBBYGILL.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. And thank you all for joining us on the UpFlip podcast.
Thank you.